What if the biggest shift in women's basketball didn't happen during a game, but behind closed doors in a boardroom with a signature on a contract that most fans never even saw? Because that's where this story really begins. Not with a highlight, not with a buzzer beater, but with a decision that quietly changed the balance of power in an entire league before a single tip-off ever happened. And the moment that ink dried, something shifted. Not just in how the game would be played, but in who would control it. At first, it didn't look like a problem. A generational talent entering the league. Record-breaking viewership. Sold-out arenas. More eyes on the WNBA than ever before. On the surface, everything looked like progress. The kind of moment the league had been waiting for. The kind of breakthrough players and fans had dreamed about for years. But underneath that excitement, something else was building. Something quieter, and far more complicated. Because when one player arrives with more attention, more money, and more influence than the system has ever seen before, it doesn't just elevate the league. It forces everyone inside it to react. Veterans who spent years fighting for respect suddenly found themselves competing with a spotlight they never had access to. Roles began to shift. Expectations changed. And without anyone saying it out loud, a new hierarchy started forming. And that's when the tension started. Not in press conferences, not in official statements, but in the way the game was played. In the physicality, in the energy, in the small moments that didn't show up in the box score, but told a much bigger story. The kind of story you only notice if you're really paying attention. Because this wasn't just about adjusting to a rookie. This was about something much bigger. It was about control, about identity, about a league that had spent decades building itself one way, suddenly being pulled in a completely different direction almost overnight. And the most surprising part? The conflict wasn't just between players. It was between two versions of the WNBA, both fighting to define what the league should become next. Before a single WNBA game was played, before any rivalries formed, before any rookie mistakes could even happen, Caitlin Clark had already changed the league in a way no stat line ever could. Because this wasn't just about basketball. This was about power. When Clark signed her massive deal with Nike, reportedly worth up to $28 million over 8 years, it didn't just make headlines. It sent a message. A loud one. One that every player in the league heard immediately, whether they admitted it or not. This wasn't a normal endorsement. This wasn't a routine rookie deal. This was a declaration. Nike wasn't just investing in a player. They were betting on a future. And in that future, Clark wasn't just part of the WNBA. She was the centerpiece. To really understand how big that is, you have to zoom out for a second. The highest paid players in the WNBA don't come close to numbers like that. Not even in the same conversation. For years, veterans built their careers grinding through seasons, fighting for recognition, slowly earning respect both on and off the court. And suddenly, a rookie walks in with a deal that eclipses what many of them will make in their entire careers. That kind of shift doesn't just stay on paper. It changes the room. Because now, without playing a single professional game, Clark wasn't just another player trying to earn her spot. She was already the most visible face in the league, the most marketable, the most talked about. And whether anyone liked it or not, that visibility came with influence. And influence creates pressure, not just on her, but on everyone else. Because when the spotlight becomes that focused on one player, it forces a comparison. It raises questions no one wants to ask out loud. Who really runs this league? Who deserves the attention? And more importantly, who's being overlooked? For the veterans, this wasn't just about welcoming a rookie. It felt like being replaced before the season even started. And that's where things started to shift in a way fans couldn't immediately see. Because while the headlines were celebrating a historic deal and a new era of opportunity, inside the league, a different conversation was beginning to take shape. A quieter one built on tension, pride, and something a lot harder to measure than stats: respect. The moment the season tipped off, the tone was set almost immediately. And it didn't take long to realize this wasn't going to be a smooth transition. From her very first games, Caitlin Clark wasn't just being defended, she was being tested. Every possession felt heavier. Every drive came with contact. Every movement off the ball was met with resistance that went beyond normal defensive pressure. It was physical, relentless, and at times uncomfortable to watch. This wasn't college anymore. And yes, every rookie goes through an adjustment period. That's expected. But this felt different. The intensity wasn't just about stopping her from scoring. It felt like something more deliberate. Like every defender had something to prove, not just about their game, but about the narrative surrounding her. And then came the moment that changed everything. When Kennedy Carter delivered that now infamous shoulder check, away from the ball, unexpected, and impossible to ignore, it instantly became bigger than just a foul. The play was upgraded, replayed, dissected from every angle, and within hours it was everywhere. But what made it explode wasn't just the contact. It was what it represented. To some, it was simple, a hard, aggressive play. The kind that happens in professional sports all the time. A message to a rookie, this is how the league works. Nothing personal, just competition. But to millions of others watching, especially the wave of new fans drawn in by Clark, it didn't look routine at all. It looked targeted. It looked unnecessary. And more importantly, it looked like a statement. A statement that said, hype doesn't protect you here. And that's when the conversation changed. Suddenly, every foul against Clark was no longer just part of the game. It became evidence. Clips started circulating. Compilations of hard hits, off-ball contact, aggressive closeouts. Fans began asking questions that went beyond basketball. Was this normal? Or was this something else entirely? The league found itself under a microscope. Analysts debated it. Former players weighed in. Even voices from outside the WNBA started paying attention. And with every game, the pressure grew, not just on Clark, but on the league itself to respond, to define where the line actually was. Because this wasn't just about how physical the game should be. It was about intent. And the more people watched, the harder it became to ignore that something deeper might be unfolding beneath the surface. Up until that point, the tension was building, but it was still unspoken. People were debating clips, arguing over plays, trying to figure out what they were really watching. But no one had stepped forward and said it directly. No one had drawn a clear line in the sand. And then, Sophie Cunningham did. Known across the league for her toughness, her edge, and her willingness to do the dirty work, Cunningham wasn't just another player offering an opinion. She represented something deeper. A version of the WNBA that had been built through years of grit, sacrifice, and fighting for respect when almost no one was watching. So when she spoke, it carried weight. And she didn't soften it. She made it clear, this is the pros. This is how the league works. Physicality isn't personal. It's part of the game. Rookies don't get special treatment. They get tested. Every night. Every possession. That's how you earn your place. To some, it sounded like honesty. A veteran explaining reality to a new audience that didn't fully understand what professional basketball looks like at this level. No drama. No agenda. Just the truth. But to a rapidly growing audience that had just entered the WNBA through Caitlin Clark, it landed completely differently. Because they weren't hearing explanation. They were hearing justification. Justification for the hits. For the off-ball contact. For the moments that felt less like competition and more like something targeted. And suddenly, Cunningham's words weren't just about basketball anymore. They became part of the controversy itself. Within hours, everything escalated. Clips of her comments spread across social media. Headlines twisted the narrative. Fans reacted instantly and loudly. Accusations started flying. Jealousy, bitterness, gatekeeping. Words that carried far more emotion than context. And just like that, Cunningham's role changed. She wasn't just a player anymore. She became a symbol of the old guard. The players who built the league when it was still fighting for survival. The ones who believed respect had to be earned the hard way. And in the eyes of many new fans, the ones now standing in the way of something bigger. What she likely intended as a defense of the league's culture was now being interpreted as resistance to its future. And that's when this situation stopped being about a single foul, or even a single player. Because now it had a voice. And once something like that becomes public, there's no going back. What happened next didn't stay on the court. It didn't stay in interviews either. It exploded into something much bigger and much harder to control. Because almost overnight, the conversation around Caitlin Clark stopped being about her performance and turned into a full-blown divide between two completely different groups of people watching the same game and seeing two completely different realities. On one side, you had the longtime WNBA fans, the ones who had been there long before the sold-out arenas, long before the viral highlights, long before the sudden surge of media attention. To them, this wasn't new. This was how the league had always been. Physical, tough, unforgiving. They pointed to legends like Diana Taurasi and Sue Bird, players who went through the same battles, took the same hits, and earned their respect the hard way. In their eyes, nothing unusual was happening. This was just the process. But on the other side, everything looked different. The new wave of fans, millions of them, weren't just watching for the game. They were watching for Clark. They saw a generational talent bringing unprecedented attention to the league. More viewers, more revenue, more opportunities for everyone involved. And what they saw on the court didn't look like a welcome. It looked like resistance. It looked like the very player responsible for elevating the league was being targeted, tested in ways that went beyond normal competition. And when veterans like Sophie Cunningham defended that physicality, it didn't feel like explanation. It felt like protection of the past. That's when the lines were drawn. Not officially, not by the league, but by the fans. Conversations turned into arguments. Arguments turned into narratives. And narratives started shaping how every single moment was interpreted. A hard foul wasn't just a hard foul anymore. It depended on which side you were on. To some, it was toughness. To others, it was something the league needed to outgrow. And that's what made this situation so dangerous. Because once a league splits like that, not just in players, but in perception, it creates pressure from both directions. Pressure to stay true to its identity, and pressure to evolve into something bigger. The WNBA wasn't just dealing with a rookie anymore. It was dealing with a transformation. And the problem with transformations is that not everyone survives them. While the debate played out publicly, on social media, on TV, in interviews, the real shift wasn't happening in front of cameras. It was happening quietly. And it was happening fast. Because behind the scenes, the WNBA wasn't just reacting to the attention around Caitlin Clark. It was adapting to it. The league had never experienced this level of visibility before. New audiences, new sponsors, new expectations. And with that came a different kind of pressure, one that had nothing to do with wins and losses. This was about image. For years, the league had built its identity on toughness, defense, physical play, a style rooted in earning everything the hard way. But now, with millions of new eyes watching, the priorities were shifting. The focus was expanding beyond just the game itself, to how the game looked, how it felt, and how it was perceived by a much larger audience. And that changes everything. Because in this new version of the league, every moment carries weight beyond the scoreboard. Every highlight, every clip, every controversial play, it all feeds into a larger narrative. One that determines whether new fans stay or walk away. That's why the role of physicality started to feel different. A hard foul used to be just that, a basketball play. Something you moved past. Something that didn't linger. But now, that same play can dominate headlines for days. It can shape public perception. It can create questions the league is forced to answer, whether it wants to or not. And when that starts happening, adjustments follow. More scrutiny. More attention from officials. A tighter line on what's acceptable and what crosses it. Not because the fundamentals of the game changed, but because the environment around it did. Because when a league grows this quickly, it has to protect what's driving that growth. And right now, that's star power. Players who create highlights. Players who bring attention. Players who make people tune in, not just once, but consistently. That's the new engine, the new foundation, and everything else starts to shift around it, which creates a problem. Because not every player fits into that model. Some players built their careers on physicality, on defense, on doing the things that don't show up in highlight reels. And in a league that's now being shaped by visibility and marketability, those contributions start to feel less valued. Not because they aren't important, but because they don't translate the same way. And that's where the real tension begins to surface. Because the game hasn't changed overnight, but what the league needs from it has. For years, players like Sophie Cunningham didn't just survive in the WNBA, they defined it. They were the tone setters. The players who made opponents uncomfortable. The ones who handled the physical battles so others could shine. Every team needed someone like that. Someone willing to cross that line just enough to shift momentum, to protect teammates, to make a statement without saying a word. That role wasn't just accepted. It was respected. Because in a league built on toughness, those players represented something essential. They were proof that success wasn't just about talent. It was about resilience, effort, and a willingness to do the things nobody else wanted to do. But now, that role is starting to feel different. Not overnight. Not in a way that's officially announced. But in the way it's being viewed. In the way it's being judged. In the way certain moments suddenly carry consequences they didn't before. Because in this new version of the league, identity matters in a different way. It's not just about what you do on the court. It's about how it looks, how it's received, and how it fits into a much bigger picture. A picture shaped by millions of new viewers, global attention, and a growing business model centered around star power. And that creates a difficult question. Where does a player whose strength is physicality fit into a system that's moving toward finesse, speed, and highlight-driven moments? Because every time a play crosses that invisible line, every time it looks too aggressive, too unnecessary, it's no longer just a basketball decision. It becomes a talking point, a headline, a potential issue for a league trying to present itself in a certain way. And when that happens enough times, it starts to redefine value. Not skill, value. Because now a player who scores, creates, and drives engagement brings something measurable beyond the game. Attention, growth, revenue. And those things start to carry weight in ways that don't always show up in traditional stats. Meanwhile, a player whose impact is built on disruption, on slowing things down, on making the game harder, can suddenly feel out of place in a system that's trying to speed everything up. That's the shift. And it's subtle until it isn't. Because eventually, it reaches a point where it's no longer about adjusting your style. It's about whether your style still fits at all. And that's where this situation becomes more than just a conversation. It becomes a reality. Because the league isn't standing still. It's moving forward. And not everyone moves with it. There's one part of this story that almost never gets said out loud. Not in interviews. Not in press conferences. Not even in most debates. But it's there, underneath everything. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because while the conversation has been focused on physicality, respect, and style of play, the real tension is being fueled by something much deeper. Money. When Caitlin Clark signed that massive deal with Nike, it didn't just change perception. It completely disrupted the financial reality inside the league. To put it simply, the numbers don't match. The highest-paid WNBA players, veterans who have spent years building the league, earn salaries that hover around a fraction of what Clark is making through endorsements alone. Not over a career. Not over multiple seasons. In a single year. And that kind of imbalance does something powerful. It shifts the internal dynamics in ways that don't need to be spoken to be felt. Because for years, the structure was clear. Veterans led. Experience mattered. Status was earned over time. And while the pay wasn't equal to other leagues, there was still a sense of order. A system everyone understood. But now, a rookie walks in with financial power that instantly places her in a completely different category. Not just as a player, but as a brand, as an asset, as someone whose presence carries value far beyond the court. And that changes how everything is interpreted. Because when players step onto the floor now, they're not just competing against talent. They're competing against visibility, against influence, against a version of success that doesn't follow the same path they took to get there. And that creates something difficult to ignore. Not necessarily jealousy, but tension. A quiet frustration that comes from watching the system evolve in a way that benefits someone who just arrived, while those who built it had to fight for far less. It's not about denying Clark's talent. It's about what her success represents. Because it introduces a new reality where marketability, attention, and global appeal carry just as much, if not more, weight than years of experience and contribution. And that reality shows up in subtle ways. In the extra physicality. In the edge behind certain plays. In the tone of certain comments. Not as a coordinated effort, but as a reflection of something deeper. Because when a player earning a fraction of that money steps onto the court with someone whose brand is worth tens of millions, the game becomes more than just basketball. It becomes symbolic. Every possession, every collision, every moment carries an unspoken message. And here's the irony. The very actions meant to challenge that new reality end up reinforcing it. Because every controversial moment involving Clark doesn't hurt her value. It amplifies it. It drives attention. It fuels narratives. It brings more eyes to the game. And in a league that is rapidly growing, attention is currency. So the more resistance she faces, the more powerful she becomes. And that's what makes this situation so complex. Because the tension isn't just emotional. It's structural. And once something like that takes hold, It doesn't just go away. At this point, it's easy to frame this as a simple story. A rookie versus a veteran. A rising star versus an enforcer. Caitlin Clark on one side, Sophie Cunningham on the other. But that's not what this really is. That's just the surface. Because underneath everything, the fouls, the comments, the reactions, this has always been about something much bigger. Something that was already building long before either of them became the center of attention. This is about two versions of the WNBA colliding in real time. One version was built over decades. A league defined by toughness, defense, and a team-first mentality. A group of players who fought for recognition when there was very little of it, who played in front of smaller crowds, with less media coverage and far fewer opportunities. For them, respect wasn't given. It was earned through consistency, resilience, and years of work. That version of the league didn't rely on stars. It relied on survival. But now, there's another version emerging. A version built on visibility, on highlight plays, on global appeal. A version where one player can shift the entire direction of the league almost overnight. Where attention isn't slowly earned, it arrives all at once, bringing with it opportunities the league has never seen before. And that kind of shift doesn't happen quietly. It creates friction. Because for the players who built the first version, this new reality can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. Not because they don't want the league to grow, but because the way it's growing challenges everything they had to go through to get here. And for the new wave of fans, this version feels right. Exciting, fast, centered around talent that's easy to follow and impossible to ignore. A style that mirrors what modern audiences expect from sports at the highest level. Both sides make sense. And that's what makes this so complicated. Because this isn't a situation where one side is completely right and the other is completely wrong. It's a transition, a moment where the league is evolving, and not everyone experiences that evolution the same way. That's why every game feels heavier right now. Every foul feels more meaningful. Every comment carries more weight. Because it's not just about what's happening in that moment. It's about what it represents. The past, trying to hold its ground. And the future, pushing forward whether anyone is ready or not. And the truth is, this isn't something the league can avoid. It has to choose a direction. Not officially. Not in a statement. But through its actions. Through what it promotes. What it protects. What it allows. And what it doesn't. Because momentum like this doesn't slow down. It builds. And right now, everything points in one direction. Forward. At this point, the biggest mistake you can make is thinking this is still undecided. Because it's not. The moment Caitlin Clark stepped into the league with that level of attention, that level of backing, and that level of impact, the direction was already set. Not officially. Not publicly. But in a way that shows up in everything that's happened since. In the coverage. In the conversations. In the way the game is being presented to the world. Because leagues don't grow by accident. They grow by leaning into what works. And right now, what works is undeniable. More viewers. More engagement. More global attention than the WNBA has ever seen before. A level of visibility that players, fans, and organizations have been pushing for over decades. And whether people are comfortable admitting it or not, a huge part of that momentum is tied directly to one player. But growth always comes with a cost. Because every time a league evolves, it leaves something behind. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but inevitably. The style changes, the priorities shift, and the roles that once defined the game don't always carry the same weight anymore. That's where this story becomes uncomfortable. Because players like Sophie Cunningham didn't just exist in the old version of the league. They helped build it. They carried it through years when the spotlight wasn't there, when the recognition wasn't there, when the opportunities were limited. And now, as the league finally reaches the level they fought for, it's transforming into something different, something bigger, something faster, something that doesn't always need what they represent in the same way it once did. And that's the part no one wants to say out loud. Because this isn't about whether those players are talented enough. They are. It's about whether the league still needs what they bring, in the same way. And that's a much harder question to answer. Because the future of the WNBA is no longer hypothetical. It's happening in real time. Every game, every headline, every moment that pulls in more attention and pushes the league further into a new era. An era built on stars, on visibility, on moments that travel far beyond the court. And the truth is, That future isn't slowing down for anyone. So the real question isn't whether the league will change. It already has. The real question is, who changes with it, and who gets left behind? If you made it this far, you're already seeing what most people are just starting to notice. And that's exactly why this channel exists, to break down the stories behind the headlines, the shifts behind the stats, and the moments that quietly change everything. So if you want more deep dives like this, stories that go beyond the surface, make sure to subscribe, drop a like, and let me know in the comments where you stand on this. Because this conversation, it's just getting started.